Good afternoon, dear attendees, dear colleagues, friends, and stakeholders. Welcome to this webinar in the PWCET series. We will give it one more minute for even more of you to join, and then we will get started. Thank you. All right, welcome once again, dear panelists, dear participants, stakeholders, colleagues, and friends. Bonjour à vous, good afternoon to you, and a big warm welcome to our latest virtual event in the PWCET series, brought to you by ARE in cooperation with the GIZs, with the Grüne Burger Energie Initiative, Green People's Energy. Today's topic is on the financing of the clean energy transition in Africa, with a focus on the gap and opportunities. I'm very happy to say that more than 700 people have signed up for this virtual show. So a big thank you for joining us, and indeed for tuning in. Today, in the next slide, we will see the agenda we have concocted together for you. So after this very short, I assure you, opening remarks on my part, I will pass the floor to my colleague, Ms. Pammersberger, who is our Access to Finance Specialist at ARE, followed by our keynote speech by Mrs. Bärbel Höhn, the Special Representative for Energy in Africa of the German BMZ, who is leading the GBE initiative. And then we are happy to have our expert interventions today by GreenMax, represented through Daniel Kitwa, by GBE in Benin, so at country level, by Mr. Sandro, that is, our valued member, Sustain Solar, Ms. Gracia Munganga, excuse me. And then one of our newer companies that we're very happy to see today, Mr. Ketil Royna from Differ Community Power. This will be then followed by a moderated discussion Q&A, and the closing will be done by Ms. Otremba of the GIZ. Next slide, please. So if you're new to ARE, well, ARE essentially is the oldest, largest business association for the distributed renewable energy industry, focusing on emerging markets, of course, in the realm of everything that is to do with clean energy access. We are very happy that at the start now of 2023, we federate more than 200 companies and a global network of around 30,000 let's say in our community, spanning the 3 continents that we focus on in more than 55 countries. In the next slide, you can see indeed countries where we are active with live projects. Also, all the places with the little dots on it is where we have partners in either our national counterparts, regional or international organizations. And so you can, of course, find all of this on our website, and also what our members do, who they are, and what they're specialized in. Next slide. In terms of services, of course, the idea for this business association is to help companies in their business development, in their projects, and so on, so that the level of energy access is increased. Of course, we work also a lot with major public sector partners, national governments on policy and advocacy. All of this is supported by communications and marketing. Next slide, please. So coming to the topic of today, in terms of the PWCET series, this is our cooperation with GBE, and stands for Paving the Way for the Clean Energy Transition with Decentralized Renewable Energy. So the idea here really is to promote the public discourse on the subject of the clean energy transition. And then today, as I mentioned, we will focus on the gaps and especially the opportunities when it comes to financing this transition in the context of Africa. And then followed by a moderated discussion with you, the audience. So please stand ready with your questions, your observations, so that we can have a good interaction later on. And then it is my honor to pass the floor to my colleague, Ms. Pammersberger of ARE. Gabriele, the floor is yours. Dear participants, thank you so much for dialing in. Cheers.
Yes, many thanks, David, and a very warm welcome to all of you, dear participants. My name is Gabriele Pammersberger, and I'm working as the Access to Finance Specialist with ARE, as David has already mentioned. It's a great pleasure to moderate this 8th webinar under the PWCET series on this really very exciting topic of innovative financing instruments and approaches for a clean energy transition in Africa. So before we will discuss with our guests on the panel the major challenges and barriers that still exist for clean energy projects in Africa, as well as their proposed solutions, I would like to welcome Mrs. Bärbel Höhn, the Special Representative for Energy in Africa at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMCET, who will deliver today's keynote speech. So dear Mrs. Höhn, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Gabriele. And a warm welcome to all the participants of this very interesting webinar. Because when we started the Green People's Energy, or in German, Grüne Bürgerenergie, one of the main and important questions was the question of financing instruments, because we are talking about decentralized energy solutions, and that was not easy to find a financing instrument to overcome the situation for the people there and to look for solutions. But we learned in the last 3 years that we had a rethinking of the field of renewables because the global energy crisis was a wake-up call to invest in renewable energies. And many countries feel very painfully their dependence of fossil fuels and the rising cost of importing fossil fuels. We could see how helpful and necessary renewables are, because the sun and the wind don't cost anything for the countries, and everybody has sun and wind in its country. The governments who invested in renewable energies in the crisis of COVID-19 pandemic in their recovery packages, they were better situated for the next crisis of the Ukraine war or Russian war in Ukraine, where the energy prices were sharply increasing. So it's good to invest in renewables because the next crisis will come. But the reality is we are not ambitious enough. So we need more investments in renewables. And we could see that especially in the COVID-19 pandemic, where we had a lot of obstacles and economic crisis, the people in sub-Saharan Africa have less access to electricity. So in the African Energy Outlook 2022 from the IEA, we noticed that 4% more people in Africa lack access to energy in 2021 if you compare it with 2019. So the proportion of the people with access to enough energy in sub-Saharan Africa in 2020 was only 43%. And that means 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa lack access to energy. And it is now more dramatic because of the Russian war in Ukraine and really the increasing prices. And on the other side, we can see that more and more would like to invest. And when we see the IEA Renewable Energy Report, that means that installation for renewable energy and renewable power will increase sharply. So they consider that it will be the double of the capacity of renewables in the next 5 years, and will overtake coal as the largest source of electricity generation along the way. That is a good news, and maybe can help that we possibly reach the limited global warming to 1.5 degrees, but we have to do a lot. And one of the main points, as I said, is a financing instrument we are talking about. We see not so many approaches to promote decentralized energies, and we must do more to reach the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The most important point is that we need the political will of the governments, of the parliaments, and of the decision maker to support renewables. And we must convince the people. And therefore, it's important to talk about the advantages of renewable energies over fossil fuels. And one of the main points is that renewables are cheaper than oil, coal, or gas. Even the renewables means more independence from importing of oil, coal, and gas. You don't have to pay money for fossil imports. The money can better invest it in your own country, and that is our idea. Investments in renewables are increasing, but not good enough. We are not good enough. We don't have a breaking through. We must be better in the future. In every country, we see resistance, blockades against renewables. And why? We must identify the obstacles to overcome them. When the political will is defined, and is existing, we have to look for a better framework, the laws, found institutions, look for funds and grants. And the investors must be able to make their own decisions within this framework. One instrument are the tariffs. If the tariffs are not good enough, maybe in some countries they are very low when you have only the households and small consumers, nobody will invest under these circumstances in decentralized solutions because it's too expensive, because this very low tariffs are subsidized by the government. And if the government will not subsidize mini-grid solutions, you can't realize an investment. Because we must even look for private investors to be able to reach more villages and be more successful. And on the other side, there are a lot of questions. For example, in some countries, offshore solutions can only be operated by the national energy company, and that takes a long time. Or what about the guarantee for private capital investments when the national grid reaches the villages? Or what's about a good operator model required from the private investor? Because a good maintenance, a good operator model is very, very important if you are talking about decentralized solutions. Otherwise, a small component will break and the whole power plant doesn't work any longer. What's about the good quality of the hardware? Some countries have something like an institution that is checking the quality. Or what's about the conditions of concessions granted? What's about the bureaucracy? So we have a lot of questions to answer, and then give private investors a guarantee for their invested capital. And on the other side, we would like to strengthen the local market, the domestic market. So help small and medium-sized companies to grow and create jobs in this field. And that means, for example, we must train the people. Training the people is one of the main points. We need energy experts and craftsman knowledge to be successful with our program. And all these ideas we were talking about in our Green People's Energy Program: training, conditions, framework, and financial instruments. And that is what we are talking today. And that is really one of the main problems, because we need this money for investing in decentralized solutions and in villages. And our idea is, from the Green People's Energy, that a mix from grants, from loans for private capital, and from including the small and medium-sized companies in the countries is the best solution and a very successful solution. That means that we have to empower small and medium-sized entrepreneurs and to improve the local markets. Yes, and I think it's very important that we make a model, a financing model, where, for example, the local entrepreneurs have the possibility to look for the operator system, to earn money to operate the system in the future for some years, and even have a part of the income of the prices of electricity. So there's an interest that the power plants, photovoltaic plants of the mini grid is working for a longer time, because we must look for a financial instrument that is sustainable, that is really working maybe in 10 years and not only for some months. And yeah, so that's good for the quality, a good quality of the material, but also good ideas for the operating systems. And all this we developed with our Green Pipots Energy. So we developed different financing models, and some of them we really tested. So we have some experience, and two of the speakers, they are will tell you something about our financing instruments. One is Raswan Sandhu from Benin. He has experience with the result-based financing instrument and to report on it. And the other is Hans-Martin Hagen. He developed a financial instrument for the KfW, which uses grants and private capital from crowd lenders. And Daniel Kitwa from the GreenMax will report on it. So I think we will have an exciting and inspiring debate, and I'm very interested to hear all the news from the speakers. Yeah, let us start.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Höhn, for this very interesting and really inspiring keynote speech, and really for setting the scene for our webinar. So now I would like to introduce our esteemed guests on today's panel, who will present their organizations and innovative solutions for the clean energy transition. Mrs. Höhn already alluded to the very recently launched and very innovative financing facility for off-grid energy projects, the Clean Energy and Energy Inclusion for Africa Foundation. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Mr. Daniel Kitwa, the Deputy Director for Energy Access Finance at GreenMax Capital Advisors, who are part of the management consortium of this new initiative. So Daniel, it's, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Just confirming you can hear me all right?
It's perfect.
All right. Once again, thank you to the ARA team and GIZ for organizing this. And really, financing is at the core of the energy transition, particularly in Africa, where energy transition, unlike some parts of the world where discussion is moving from one unclean form of energy to another, to renewables, here it's more about unlocking energy access. You know, CI Africa was started as an initiative from BMZ, and through KfW was initiated towards the tail end of 2021. The consortium that currently is working on this includes Triple Jump as a fiduciary fund manager, GreenMax Capital.
It seems,
yeah.
we're back.
Sorry, I got disconnected. So as I was saying, through BMZ and KfW, the initiative was started the tail end of 2021, managed by 3 entities, that is Triple Jump, GreenMax Capital, and Persistent. And the idea is to provide what we call a holistic one-stop shop model towards unlocking energy access through decentralized technologies such as green mini-grids and standalone solar. So the 3 sort of initial idea was, one, within the frame of mini-grids, we looked at results-based financing as a critical component of de-risking mini-grids in the long term. And for the facility, around 21 million euros has been allocated for that. And out of that component, 1 million is geared towards technical assistance. And then further along the road, we have what we call the Smart Outcomes Fund component. Currently has gotten commitments of 5 million euros. Now, this component is sort of an improved or a sort of a creative results-based financing that is incentive-based to support mini-grids and also standalone solutions that are unlocking productive use of energy. And those 2 facilities are managed by the GreenMax team. And then we have the crowd lending window capitalized at 28 million euros, which works hand in hand with crowd lending platforms to provide the necessary debt financing package that should go hand in hand with the 2 products that I've mentioned. Next slide, please. So in terms of the approach towards this instrument, we have obviously targeting solar home systems, off-grid CNI, productive use of energy, especially with the latter being with the Smart Outcomes Fund. Our focus countries, as you can see there, for the crowd lending window is broader than the ones in the green mini grid sort of RDF target. In terms of the products that the crowd lending window can provide, there's a lot of flexibility pegged into the structure, including opportunity to provide senior debt, subordinate debt, equity, and guarantee instruments, as well as a portion of that going to technical assistance to crowd lending platforms that would partner with the CI Africa facility. From a process perspective of this CL window, we have an onboarding mechanism for crowd lenders, as well as an opportunity to partner in 2 co-investing structures, which I'll show you in the next slide. You can go to the next slide. So in one of the structures, we have what we call the lean lending model, where CI Africa would partner with the crowd lending platform and basically come in as part of the crowd, and with the hope of providing what we call subordinate debt instruments to the resources that the crowd lending platform will catalyze from the retail investors. And of course, the end user sort of beneficiaries would be off-grid companies and mini grids. In the direct sort of option, which is a second option, this is where now CI Africa basically co-invests in parallel with the crowd lending platforms to the respective off-grid or mini grid companies. You can go to the next slide. Now, going back to the second instrument, that is the RBF facility, we have the CI Africa providing output-based grants and technical assistance to mini grids, with the hope of unlocking access to energy to end user households. I would say also micro SMEs, which are typical small business units in rural communities, as well as unlocking positive gender outcomes by supporting women in these rural communities. This process again is particularly managed remotely through the ODC Energy Solutions platform, where we are able to monitor the progress of the projects right from inception throughout implementation. Next slide. Just providing more context to the RBF window, I think one critical thing that we've seen is in a number of historical design aspects of RBF instruments, you have a situation where RBF products tend to stand in isolation. But in this case, the RBF is one, I would say, the first stage of financing that possibly unlocks the crowd lending debt that I had mentioned before. So basically, what happens is for developers who get qualified to the RBF facility, they're able to, to stand a chance towards getting the debt pre-financing package as well. For the RBF process, we have a pre-qualification round all through the Odyssey platform. And then we have what we call a site-specific vetting stage, again through the Odyssey platform, where developers would put forward their prospective portfolios that they will like supported by the RBF funds. Next slide. Now for this, the other, I would say, RBF instrument, which we are calling Smart Outcomes Fund. The Smart Outcomes component works to unlock productive use energy solutions to communities. We have what we call the first phase. When we do the formal call for application, we'll be receiving applications for mini grid providers providing PUE assets in those, or PUE appliances to the communities. And then in the second phase, we will welcome it to other standalone and PUE providers directly working towards deploying those solutions in those communities. Now, in terms of approach, similarly to the RBF facility, we will work through the Odyssey platform. However, because these payments are a portion of them while are being paid upon realizing connections, there's a significant portion that is paid off upon triggers around impact that the PUE partner would be providing. So we'll have again an M&E verifier with a third-party entity that will assess the claims that have been attached to those impacts that the respective developer or PUE provider would have committed to. Now, some of these indicators include, the number of people that have been impacted, or in terms of access to the PUE appliance, whether it's also first-time access to the PUE appliance, and also whether there has been positive gender outcomes, such as women empowerment in these communities. Again, this process is, really pre-agreed at source, so that there's a transparency mechanism embedded between the program and the implementing entity, be it the mini-grid developer or the PUE appliance distributor. You can go to the next slide. Now, just in summary, just looking ahead in terms of the program, we are quite grateful that BMZ and KFW have provided the necessary resources to support this initiative. We are also looking to work collaboratively with other agencies such as GIZ and the Swiss Development Corporation, among others, to broaden this product, both from a fundraising perspective, but also from a co-financing perspective, and also to increase awareness about the need for a variety of financial instruments to support developers and off-grid companies in these markets. In terms of areas of operation that are needed, and possibly Mrs. Babel-Hoon had alluded to earlier, there's need for improved frameworks, regulatory frameworks, particularly around tariff regimes, regulations around the process and the protocols of licensing, particularly for green mini-grid assets, as well as what we call integrated energy planning, in terms of how the green mini-grid developers interact with, say, public utilities and other off-grid players. While in summary, while CI Africa is young, I think the first phase of implementation is already showing a lot of promising opportunity going forward, given basically the demand for these instruments is beyond what the current supply of capital is available. So I look forward to discussing this further in the Q&A. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for this very interesting overview of this new facility, and definitely will trigger a lot of questions also then for our discussion. At this point, I would also like to mention that to you, dear participants, that you are invited really to put your questions into the chat or slash question function of the of this platform, so we can really collect all your questions and we'll then put them forward to the speakers, and maybe you could also kindly mention to whom you are addressing a question. So thank you very much. Let me now introduce our next guest on the panel. It's Mr. Razvan Sandro, Project Manager for GB Benin. Mrs. Hoen already mentioned this program that supports decentralized renewable energy companies with accessing finance for the businesses and projects, but is also supporting the development of innovative consumer finance mechanisms aimed at helping the end users of DRE solutions to access funding so they can acquire these solutions. So, dear Razvan, the floor is yours. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Gabriele. Hi, everyone. My name is Razvan, and I'm the GBE project manager in Benin. And so today, as Gabriele already introduced, I have the pleasure of going through these two aspects with you. Next slide, please. And so while Frau Hoen already, or Ms. Hoen already introduced what GBE is, I wanted to quickly shed a light on what GBE on GIZ side is doing. We're a regional program implementing in 9 African countries, including in Benin, and it's a project of the technical cooperation, and we're focusing on promoting decentralized renewable energy. Next, please. And I will not go into lengths of what we're doing, but basically in Benin, we're focusing on productive use of energy as well as mini-grids. You will see my slides are quite packed to a certain extent, but I will quickly go through them. You're invited to then look through them at your own speed later on. Next, please. So when it comes to next slide, sorry, I don't know if it, yes, thanks. So when it comes to access to finance, I think we have to look at 2 levels. As Gabriele also mentioned, we're looking at the company level, access to finance to these companies, but also on an end customer level. Next slide. So when it comes to access to finance on a company level, what did GBE do? Basically, in 1 year, we work together with specialized business development services providers to offer an 80-hour individual coaching program to 10 local solar companies working on accounting, administration, business plan, but also preparing them to submit for finance. We also organized a pitch competition for these companies, and we did a matchmaking between solar companies and mostly foreign investors. And so far, we have 3 companies that got offered funding. One of the biggest challenges that we saw was that when it came to international investors, of course, they're looking for the lowest hanging fruit, which means lowest risk versus highest opportunity and potential, which means that at some point, most of the foreign investors that were contacting us, they were contacting the same single one Beninese companies, which is great for that company, but we're seeing the market not addressed. And also, when it comes to local banks, we're seeing this quite often in Benin, unfortunately, very high collateral that companies cannot provide. At the other hand, we're seeing that as we're running results-based financing mechanisms here in Benin, and I will mention them later on, we have the possibility for the RBF verification to act as a track record for potential investors. And so we as GIZ were sometimes asked, can you certify that so and so many clients have been verified by you and the clients are real? And so this is something that we're also doing. So if you would ask me what I would wish for, I would wish for that maybe DFIs and others would, let's say, reduce the risk for investors and crowd lenders that Frau Höhn and say Africa mentioned to actually fund the companies, and maybe seeing as, for example, we've had this experience with the mentoring program, that we could say that investors are willing to take a higher risk if in exchange they can maybe get more transparency by companies following this very strict support program. Next, please. So this is very little that I want to talk about access to finance, because I think we're for companies, because I think also the next speakers will mention that. But I would like to really focus on the access to finance to end customers, because here what we're trying to do is basically building an ecosystem of actors by working together with solar distributors and microfinance institutions. And so we're doing this both through technical assistance and results-based financing. And so we have two operating RBF facilities. One is for solar distributors, and the incentives are linked to the sale of solar productive use equipment. And the second RBF mechanism is linked to is aimed at microfinance institutions, and the incentives are linked to giving credits to end customer for the purchase of a productive use equipment. Next slide, please. And so the way the RBF works is that in our case, it's managed by a third party. It's a French NGO called C'est der Famiga, who are operating the results-based financing mechanism on our behalf. They're working with the microfinance institutions who offer the credits at certain conditions, and I will come in a while to speak on these conditions. And so the MFIs are offering the credit supply to the end customers, but the MFIs are also in partnerships with the solar companies. The solar companies are then offering and installing the solar installation at the end user. And so we see the banks and the microfinance institutions, they are financial specialists and they focus on giving credits. And the solar companies are technical specialists and they're focusing on installing and taking care of the technology. Next slide, please. So what we did when we set up the RBF for the microfinance is we looked at what are the risks and the challenges, and we identified 4 aspects. Number one is the overheads for microfinance institutions to enter the market. So to develop a product, it takes costs, it takes time to train the agents, etc. The second aspect is that the solar market for most microfinance institutions is a new market, and therefore new market, perceived higher risk. The third aspect is the collateral. Most microfinance institutions or most financial institutions, they would require collateral. And we saw that many smaller entrepreneurs would not satisfy this collateral requirement. And then the fourth thing is that we realized that pay-as-you-go has been used in Benin quite successfully for solar home systems, but very few companies have applied pay-as-you-go in productive use settings and for productive use appliances. Next slide, please. And so what we did was, when we designed the results-based financing mechanism, we looked at several criteria and conditions. And basically, these conditions are tied to addressing some of the aspects that I mentioned earlier. And so we have a fixed results-based incentive for market entry, for developing the financial product, for training the agents, setting it up, and that's a €3,000 fixed incentive going to the microfinance institution. Then there is a default risk coverage for every credit given. if the microfinance institution, for example, accepts the solar equipment as collateral and does not require any other collateral, then they get 8% additional incentive of the loan amount. We also realized that most of the loans are usually for 12 months, whereas the recovery period of an investment in solar equipment is closer to 2 years. And so this is why if the loans are going above 2 years or above, then there is a special, an additional incentive. And last but not least, if the loan is given out through a pay-as-you-go system with the possibility of A, remote monitoring, and B, remote control, then additional 5%. And so, voila, this in a nutshell is a bit the results-based financing for microfinance that we're running in Benin. Next slide, please. And so on the last slide, you will see the different colleagues involved in the different sectors. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. Also, my colleagues, not my clients, sorry. Since we work with private sector, all I think about is clients and customers. I'm kidding. But the colleagues are also online. So if you have any questions and you type them, then the colleagues can also immediately respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Razvan, for this very insightful presentation. In my view, also really the end user side is really important also to consider. So how really to improve access to finance on the consumer side. So really very interesting. And dear audience, please put forward your questions then to Razvan. Now we would like to move. Actually, now we had two panelists who were talking more on the side of financing systems, financing mechanisms, support programs. Now we change to the company level, to the service providers. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Ms. Gracia Munganga. She's the COO of Sustain Solar, a manufacturer of modular, turnkey, containerized off-grid solar systems, who also provides asset finance solutions for their systems to address the financing needs of their customers. So very excited and looking forward to hearing from the perspective from a solution provider. And Gracia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. I hope that everyone can hear me well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers, ARE and PMZ, the Green People's Fund, for making this crucial conversation possible. So I've organized the slides of my in 3 parts. I'll give you a background as to what Sustain Solar does, then a screenshot of our understanding of the financing landscape, and then the gap essentially that we've spotted and how Sustain Solar is trying to respond to that. So Sustain Solar, we call ourselves a systems integrator. We provide modular, turnkey, containerized off-grid solar PV and battery energy storage system. We've standardized our product range. Previously, it was containers, whether a 20-foot or a 40-foot, and we have called that the Sustained Compact or Extended. And then in recent, actually demand-led, based on the conversations that we've had with our clients, we've created a non-containerized range of product. They are cabinet-based, also turnkey for smaller scale off-grid applications, such as health clinics. Next. There might be a delay due to the connection. Perfect. So what have we done to date? We have built and deployed over 32 systems across 7 countries. The system varies in size up to 100 kilowatt peak on the solar PV side and up to 230 kilowatt hours across 7 countries. Applications have been mini grids, off-grid standalone, grid tight. South Africa is going through a massive crisis of load shedding, as you know, and the residential and commercial industrial sector are picking up. In terms of the profile of clients we've worked with, that's been mini-grid developers mainly, NGOs, and some large corporate. This is just a screenshot of some of the clients that we've worked with who have been grantees of a lot of the funding programs. Next. Correct. So again, this is our understanding of the funding landscape, and I think all of us, that's why we're here today, will agree that there remains a significant gap when it comes to let's say the scale of funding required to achieve SDG 7. And I think Mrs. Ohon mentioned that at the beginning of her talk. SD for All is estimated it's about 128 billion globally to achieve the required rollout of mini-grids. Where do we get funding? Where do developers get funding, and what kind of instrument they are? Mini-grid funders group, which is largely public and donor funds, have committed 1.4 billion. And then there are a mix of private equity from the likes of Gaia, debt lenders from the likes of Soundfunder, and then also in-kind, in-country contribution at the developer level that would be available either from the utility and or the ministry. Next. And I think while we have to recognize the fact that there's been significant and continuous effort that are being put in place to tailor funding instrument that will support the scale and the speed of rollout that's currently required. If we go back to the list of categories of funders that I mentioned, on the long-term basis, we know the names. It's cross-boundary energy access, Gaia on the equity side, Infraco on the project finance debt level. And we also know, as we identified, result-based finances on the grant level have been instrumental in this de-risking mini-grid project, but also providing really a long-term financial outlook for developers. All the conversations that we're currently having with potential clients really highlight the fact that it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because there remains a funding gap. You need to be able to raise upfront capital, deploy a system to be able to access the RBF milestone, and the developer ends up being stuck in a cycle of looking for either the debt component and or equity to kick off and deploy the systems. So all the conversations that we're currently having really are highlighting the need for short-term construction finance type of instrument that would unlock the speed of deployment of the RBF significantly. We know Soundfunder is providing construction debt finance for site development. And one thing that Sustain Solar really has come up with is we believe that construction finance for site development combined with asset finance that's linked to turnkey power system as a debt instrument would unlock the scale and the speed of deploying RBF facilities significantly. From a business model perspective, it would reduce the upfront capex requirement by about 45 to 50%, which is what the power system usually costs. And it would help the developer in the long run essentially access the milestone payment a lot quicker. Next. Great. So with the blessing, we started playing around. I think the funder Tobias started playing around with this idea probably end of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, and we've piloted it successfully with 2 RBF grantees, and we are currently in discussion with a number of DFIs to scale the facility across sub-Saharan Africa. We received the blessing from our shareholders, some seed funding to pilot that in 2021. The finance was linked to the provision of our power system, be it container and or cabinet, and we identified beneficiaries based on our network in Lesotho and in Uganda. Both grantees were Power Africa Off-Grid Program grantees, and they were working with relatively short timelines. Failure to meet the required milestone would have meant that they were at risk of losing the RBFs. Sustain Solar pre-financed the system, and so our asset finance really acted as bridge financing. For the first client in Lesotho, 3 out of the 7 systems as part of the portfolio were pre-financed by Sustain Solar, and for the second client in Uganda, we pre-financed 5 of the cabinet solution for electrification of health clinics. In terms of the rates, if I went into the details of what are our terms, it would be an hour-long, maybe 2-hour-long conversation. But essentially, because it was funded out of equity from our shareholders, what we tried and compared that with was the local commercial rates, and it varied between 15 and 18% at the time. Because we are based in South Africa, it was rand-based per annum. The feedback that we received from our developers and our clients was very positive, that the construction finance and being able to pre-finance our power system was really instrumental in helping them successfully deploy and meet the RBF milestone payment and unlock that, and we got repaid from the RBF milestone payment. What have we done? So our, now that we've proven the proof of concept, we are currently working, and we've had a number of conversations with DFIs to scale the facility significantly. So the asset finance as a concept was submitted to an international DFI. We've been shortlisted, and we are currently undergoing a due diligence process. In South Africa, we've identified a construction finance facility, rand-based, very competitive, that would also be accessible, especially for rand-based transactions. So depending on where you are in sub-Saharan Africa, we've done the exercise. Mozambique, Metica to rand is almost 1-to-1. So sometimes it makes sense to have the transaction in rand. Going forward, and that's some of the feedback that we are receiving, and we know based on the conversations that we are having, the first thing is that the interest rate needs to be super attractive. And so the feedback that we're currently receiving, ideally, depending on what the final interest rates end up being with the international DFI, is we need to target upper single digit on the USD in terms of the interest rate. Actively as a team, we are building relationships and visibility with RBF facilities as a potential co-funding partner, especially for all the candidates that have already undergone your due diligence process where there is a funding gap. We are having parallel conversations with a number of developers. Pipeline is key, so it's a chicken and egg situation again. The DFI wants to see the pipeline and before the funding is committed, and vice versa. And their investors to align both our asset finance offering, but also most importantly, the project timelines. On the background, this becomes a facility on its own, and it stands on its own. So we're doing a whole lot of work to try and streamline the mechanics and processes, application process, identify inefficiencies and remove that. Risk management, there's a number of risks. I'll expand on that on the next slide, and also the cost both to sustain, but also to the end customer, most importantly. Next. And I think that's my last slide, unless you have lost me. I hope not. Perfect. Thank you so much. So this is just a summary of a couple of the lessons that we have learned through the pilot process. The first one is there will always be project delays. I think most of for both projects, we had modeled, let's say, the repayment period over less than 8 months, and I think it ended up taking at least 12 months, if not slightly more. So part of the challenge is, and maybe that's a recommendation as these RBFs are being structured, is that there should be a consideration for isolating the power system milestone from the rest of the deliverables, because that helps reduce the risk profile of the project significantly, makes our CFO sleep at night slightly better, and also ultimately reduce the cost of finance for the developer. The next, let's say, observation that we've had going back and forth and reviewing the client track record, etc., as part of the assessment, is in some instances, it has worked really well. So one of the two applicants, we were co-applicant in the RBF facility. So we had full visibility of the project numbers, payment milestones, etc. So being able to access the RBF due diligence document where possible would help save significant amount of time, both to the developer and to Sustain Solar, especially when the funding is linked to the full project completion. So that includes distribution, permitting, etc. And it also helps us evaluate our risk and peg the interest rate accordingly. We've identified a number of risks, and we're currently working on trying to mitigate that as part of our due diligence process. So linked to countries, so for example, in Nigeria, foreign currency, how do you get money out? What happens if the grantee doesn't meet their payment milestone? We end up with a stranded assets. What do we do with the stranded assets? How do we recover that? And also a big one, feedback from the developers is really, you know, the moment that you go up above double digits, you know, it becomes unattractive for some of the, based on some of the conversations that we have had. Part of what we've done as well is we've had a number of conversations with first loss facilities to try and mitigate against the risk. And, you know, currently, I think a lot of the facilities in energy access are currently only being busy targeting banks. So having a conversations around, you know, how to structure an instrument for niche, let's say funding instruments such as Sustain Solar's asset financing. I believe that there's room for that, and it would also help us unlock, reduce the risk profile significantly, and therefore the cost of finance. So at the end of the day, so the only way this instrument gets to be scaled and achieve the impact that it was intended for is, for us, what's really key is a collaboration and transparency between the supplier, the end client, RBF funders, and some of the authorities. So part of the resistance.
Sorry, excuse me.
Okay.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really very interesting, but we have to be a bit conscious of time, and we'll also give the opportunity then to the audience to ask you questions, and then we'll certainly get back to you. And thank you very much for your excellent.
This was my last slide, Gabriela, if you can hear me. So I will switch off my camera. Thank you, everyone. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you've got any questions.
Yes, we will, as I said, we will collect all the questions in the chat, but we would like to come to an end to the introduction round. And here it's now my pleasure also to welcome Mr. Kjetil Røne. He's the CEO of Differ Community Power, who specializes in providing clean, sustainable and reliable energy service, and specifically for schools and health facilities in rural off-grid areas, and looking forward to hearing your experience in the off-grid sector. Kjetil, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot. Can you hear me? Yes, excellent. Well, thanks a lot for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. It's a huge topic for 8 minutes, so I will not cover everything, of course, but I will try to provide a small flavor here. I would actually like to start with some kind of boring things, but I think it's needed, which is terminology and clarification. So please, the next one. So important, what are we to finance? Well, it's mainly two things. The first thing is to finance the CapEx, which is basically everything up until commissioning, which is hardware, of course. It's installation, it's transportation, and it's a number of things up until everything is running. And then the second point is O&M, because there's no need to install anything if we do not operate it, and we operate it properly. And Differ Community Power is focusing heavily on on operation. We are of course an EPC player as well, but we are even more so an operator of the installed systems. Next one, please. And then the question is, who can finance? And I would like to split between 3 elements. It's those who give away the money for free through grants. That can be donors, that can be foundations, but the key point is that they do not request to get the money back, as opposed to the commercial project financing type of players who provide financing with the expectations of getting their money back with an acceptable return. And this is important to keep to distinguish between these two. And then I added a third one, which is those who are providing the guarantees and other measures who can share the risk. It's not necessarily a de-risking, but it's sharing the risk. And then also important, who is actually paying in the end? Because we as a private company, we have to earn money. So we have to get the payment from someone. Of course, those who are providing the grants, they are contributing to our revenues. But then in usual economic or market situation, it's the customer who's paying. But we are operating then in countries where the customer is not necessarily able to pay. And this is the key thing. Who is, in order to achieve financing or project financing, there has to be some kind of certainty related to who is paying in the end. So, and next one, please. And another one. So we are currently operating more than 100 energy systems, both schools, but mainly health facilities. The map here is from Malawi, where we have the majority of the installations. We have currently an uptime of close to 100%. This is possible only because we are operating the systems through remote monitoring and remote operation, remote control. So there's no energy service if there is no operation. Next one, please. But as I said, the key point is who is paying us for doing the operations. I would say that there's no problem to operate as long as we get paid. Next one, please. And next one, please. Can you do the next slide, please? In my screen, I don't see the next slide. To you?
Well, yeah, you are right. I don't know, Okan or Deepak, can you go to the next slide, please? Sorry, there must be maybe a technical issue.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Let me.
Okay, I can continue with my own slides here. Please let me know when you can see it has.
Yes, we'll let you know. I will get in touch with you. Sorry
so
about that.
And the challenge is that the organizations that we are usually working with, which is UN organizations, development organizations, they quite often pay for CapEx, but they do not pay for OpEx. So the challenge here is to achieve payment for the OpEx in order to be able to operate these systems. Are you now able to do the next slide, or shall I just continue?
Maybe
Okay.
you just continue. I think
Yeah.
it's not. I'm sorry about that. So
No, that's okay. So a rhetoric question is, in a way, would you put your own money into a project where you most likely will not get your money back? Obviously, the question to that is no. So in order to reach a financial close when we are aiming at setting up that, we need to have bankable projects. And bankable projects means that we are able to ensure that those who are providing financing are able to get their money back. And there are a number of mechanisms that could contribute to that. For instance, first loss facilities, there are RBF mechanisms, there are FX mitigation, there are guarantees for no payment, and so on. But the key point that in order to ensure a financial close and bankable projects, the end user, the customer, has to take a large share of the payment. If we can ensure that, then we are entering into long contracts for operating these energy systems, which is what we are currently doing now, both in Kenya and in Malawi. And what we then can achieve by activating commercial capital is that we can do more earlier, we can install more systems earlier, and through that achieve more impact. But as I said, it's important then that there is clarity on who is paying in the end, and that the risk of non-payment is manageable, so that those who are providing the financing is able to get their money back. I think I have used my 8 minutes, and since the slides are not working properly, I think I end there and leave the floor to questions instead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kjetil, and I'm terribly sorry. I'm not even haven't got any information what's going wrong with the technology. You see now, but it's it's a bit too late. I don't know, Kjetil. Do you want to go to any particular slide of your presentation to make the final statement, or to convey the final message?
I think it's fine, because it's over time already, and we can rather take questions.
Yes. So thank you very much, really, to all the panelists. And I would actually, because we are starting now the Q&A session, I would, I think, to see faces, maybe also to suggest that my guests switch on the cameras, so we are all in the room. And since I see that we have already kind of come forward with progressed with the time, maybe I had prepared a few questions to the panelists, but maybe we go straight to the questions from the audience that I received here. So a couple of questions. Maybe let me start just in the order that they come in. So there's the first question to Mrs. Höhn. Maybe I can just read it. So investments in renewables are increasing, but about 90% of the funding is going to foreign-owned companies. Why aren't local businesses being funded? There is now a huge inequality in renewable energy finance. So the question was to you, Mrs. Höhn. So please, can I hand over?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we see that very often the capital is coming from Europe or US and foreign companies. And that's why we decided in our Green People's Energy to strengthen the local market. That's what I was talking about with the GIZ and Say Africa with KfW. So because we said, we need money from, for example, say Africa or from the GIZ, from result-based financing. We need private money, but we would like to give the order and to companies on the local market, because our goal is to strengthen the local market, that we can increase the job there, the number of jobs there, and that the local people have more income. And even, for example, because some mentioned that the operating system, because if we have local companies, they can look for the operating system. So that's fundamental, because if the operating system doesn't work, the investment is not good, because it's not sustainable. And that means we from the Green People's Energy, from GIZ, KfW and Say Africa, we are working with a local market. That's one of our main points, and my political main point, because I am a politician, you know, and you know, I'm from the Green Party, and that means I have to be sustainable. When I'm coming in 10 years, I would like to see the mini grids working and not that they failed.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's
if I may add, I may add some comment there. I think we are working in Malawi to a large extent now, and one of the problems there is that it's hard for local companies to pay for hardware in USD. They simply don't get the money out of the country. So that's a challenge that many local companies have, which we as a European company does not have. A second point is regarding operation. I'm 100% confident that in order to be able to scale up, we have to do remote operation. So that, and whether we then operate from the country itself, or whether we operate from Norway or from Europe, that doesn't really matter. It's based on the fact that data comes to the cloud and you can operate there. So of course you need local presence if there is anything, if there are maintenance issues, but the main operation thing can be done remotely. The third thing is that when we as a European company enters into a country, of course we use local companies for installation and logistics and everything that is physically to be implemented there. So there will be a lot of economic activity, even if there are international companies coming into the country. Thank you.
I don't know, Mrs. Höhn, do you want to respond to that, or shall we go to the next questions?
You know, I think I agree that one of the main points is operating system, and that we have different situations in different countries. So from our perspective, it's very important to work together with local entrepreneurs. And even we were looking for money. And as I said, for example, with the SAY Foundation, SAY Africa Foundation, we are looking for private money. So that's why we are working together with crowdlenders, because we would like to make a big participation of the whole inhabitants of Germany or Europe, Netherlands and Switzerland, because we get some private money from them, and they are more motivated to look for these projects, and that's even a part of our political solution.
Yeah,
And for
maybe.
example, Razvan, maybe we can give it to Razvan, because Razvan, he developed possibility for people who have not the possibility to get money from micro banks. They were looking for a solution, especially for women, because women, they don't own the houses and don't own the land, so they have no possibility to get money, and often. So Razvan developed a solution for this participants, and that was very important for us.
Yeah, perfect. Maybe Razvan, do you want to come in here?
Yes, I think on the one hand, so just overall to say, I completely agree that it is an issue. We sometimes also see panels about the most successful renewable energy companies in Africa, and we see lots of white faces. To first zoom into the point raised by Ms. Höhn, it's a bit similar to what we have been seeing with access to finance for women, where when we speak to microfinance institutions, for example, they tell us, well, men go for larger ticket sizes, so larger loans. For us, it's easier to process larger loans. We have more experience with male entrepreneurs, and of course, most of these people sitting in microfinance institutions, they're men themselves. And so when we were there, also with Ms. Höhn discussing this, we were in a room with all male panel from microfinance institutions, and so I think it's a bit of a similar issue, but then on a, let's say, international level, where on the one hand we are talking about, unfortunately, different ticket sizes, where a lot of the finance that's available is for much larger funding than what we're seeing potentially needed for local, more like SME solar entrepreneurs or solar companies. And so it's much easier to fund one large project rather than smaller ones. To me, it's also a matter of speaking the same language. If, as you said, most of the funders and most of the financiers are in Europe or the West, and if you're a foreign company, if you're a Western company, you know how to formulate, you know how to speak the same language as the financier. There's also high hurdles, bureaucracy, ESG requirements, where sometimes just passing through the due diligence, you have to undergo so many steps that most local companies cannot go through it, or don't have the resources or the teams and the specialists to be able to fulfill all these requirements. There are also systemic challenges, to call it that way, like biases and racism, which is also a part of this world. And I think we shouldn't neglect the elephant in the room when it comes to these elements. And of course, also coming back to the comment of Frau Höhn regarding the capacities, we're seeing that sometimes some of the smaller SME companies, they're lacking capacities in how to formulate potentially the benefits that they're having, how to market themselves to financiers. So I think there's all these challenges that we're facing when it comes to local businesses, and then again when it comes to women, it's a totally different dimension.
Maybe
Thank you very much. Yeah,
Maybe,
sorry. You want to comment?
just to add on, yeah, so in terms of what SEI Africa is doing to handle this issue or tackle this issue, as probably most of you know that, with such issues, everything rises and falls on program design or the design of the fund. So in one aspect is we have encouraged, also we do encourage in the applications for joint ventures between foreign companies and local companies, especially in certain terrains where even the footprint of foreign companies is not as high given the underdeveloped state of those markets. So we've seen a number of developers in the applications we've received so far also putting forth joint venture initiatives with local companies, which again exposes the companies to funding opportunities that otherwise they would not have received. The other element in the design, we have what we call technical assistance, and we are offering it in two ways, either as a pre-contracting TA initiative or a post-contracting. So in the pre-contracting, if there are challenges a local developer is facing that would possibly remove them from the eligibility, would support them using technical assistance. An example could be, for example, a number of developers, local developers, do not have what we call asset core models in their structuring for them to be able to attract project finance. So that's that type of legal support is provided under the technical assistance budget to enable them to optimize their structure to receive the funding when the call is actually announced. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like now to put the question forward to Gracia, because I learned that she needs to leave actually soon. So maybe I can just read out one of the questions that has been addressed to you. So what are financing models for local production of solar PV and such container-based modules locally in sub-Saharan African countries in the long term? It will reduce O&M and lack of spare parts, causing community complaints and trust in the technology. So what's your experience, since you are really manufacturing your systems locally? What type of funding sources are available? Thank you.
So I hope everyone can hear me. I'm trying to make sure that I've understood the question correctly. So we are not an OEM, so we would not manufacture our own inverter and our own batteries. We would rather integrate it into a turnkey system. So the value add that we bring, and I think Mr. Rona alluded to it, right? The value that we bring is the engineering know-how, the time saving of the installation on site, and at the end of the day, the operation and maintenance, which is key. So local manufacturing in South Africa currently is a big topic, right? So if you speak to a lot of the large OEMs, etc., they need scale. That's the only way that the price remains competitive. And at the moment, outside of South Africa, let's say the African market, if aggregated, is potentially attractive, but there are also challenges around, the logistics of moving equipment around. So our experience with being based on the continent is, we've done, if you can still hear me, we've done our homework on the equipment that works in line with the OEMs, and we've collected data of all the challenges that we've had, and a lot of it is related to, the remote nature of these sites with very poor connectivity and how that impacts on the operations. So part of our default offering at the moment is we offer remote monitoring support to our clients. Let's say we've learned quite significantly on that. We've used the OEM's platform, which enables us at the very least to communicate relatively actively with our clients, and where an intervention is required, also intervene relatively quickly. We don't have contract OEM, and I think part of the discussion with the sector is, as these instruments are being put in place, how do you essentially structure the funding such that the OEM is an integral part of the success of the program, but also it's a discussion that the developer and or the community at the end of the day is forced to have with the equipment supplier. So that has been our experience. In South Africa, because of load shedding and it being the largest market in solar, there are a number of conversations. I mean, every 2-3 weeks almost, there's an interest for a battery manufacturer, and manufacturer it's modular assembly, it's not the cells themselves, and or warehouses from various panels and or mounting structures being set up. That's been our experience. So I hope that I've done justice to the question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I still maybe have a question to Daniel and then to Rasman before we wrap up, because of course the funding programs and financing facilities are of a lot of interest. So maybe I start with Daniel. So the question here is, are either of the two windows available for financing for community-owned green electric cooperatives in Africa? Do these windows finance operating capital as well as CapEx? And what's the typical ticket size that CEI Africa is working with?
Yeah, so let me start with the last one. So in terms of ticket size, we are looking at, because our financing model is, on a unit economics basis. So, we want, we price our, according to per connection. So a minimum, we would be keen to work with a minimum of a portfolio of sites or one site with 1,000 connections. So for example, in the current window that we've already run for Kenya, we were giving developers an incentive of $500 maximum per connection. So typically that would allude to a minimum ticket size of 500,000 for a portfolio of projects for a developer. When it comes to the nature or the structure of the entities would support, we are looking at for-profit business models for mini grids, whether locally or international companies. And ideally, this is tied to what Mrs. Babelhoon mentioned around sustainability. In most cases, we have seen, of course, there could be examples of successful cooperative models. However, in a number of markets, they are not there. That's sort of not the norm. But ideally, we are looking at for-profit structures. So, I guess it might be difficult to assess at this point. But I think as the company applies or the entity applies, we'll be able to make a good sense of where the overall fit of that project is. Yeah.
Yeah. The third component was whether you are covering both OPEX and CapEx, or?
Yeah, thanks. So in terms of structure, our for the RBF window, the traditional or conventional RBF window, it's CapEx based, and we are looking at basically supporting the generation and the distribution assets being deployed, obviously spread over the projected connections, and these ones and this funding comes in after the milestone has been unlocked by the developer. And then, of course, with the CL window, there is need to pre-finance all the operations that get to construction. So there's that aspect of construction finance that kicks in with the crowd-ending window that we have. For the smart outcomes component, we note that a portion of this funding is provided upon the connection of the PWE asset. And then the other, I would say, the other incentive is staggered over a 6-18-month period, depending on the outcomes of the projects that have been realized. So in that sense, you'd say maybe indirectly, that type of funding could support, a portion of operations during that 6 to 18 month period. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect, thank you. And maybe the last question goes to Razvan. It's actually referring to your presentation, saying, I'm interested to know the characteristics of the one company that attracted all the attention from foreign investors that you were referring to. In other words, what made that one company so appealing to foreign investors?
Yeah, thanks. Now, let me try to describe this one company without people knowing who know Benin, which one company it is. But I guess everyone who knows Benin knows which company I'm talking about. I think it's a mix. Of course, it's always a mix of things. It's on the one hand a proven track record. They not only have a proven track record in terms of a long history of operating, but also a long history of good quality installations. So they're one of those companies that when you go and visit one of their older installations, it's very easy to recognize that they did it because qualitative, from a quality point of view, they have done a great job. And so this was one of the things that when they started operating, they started to make a name for themselves. The other thing is that they entered partnerships with different, let's say, foreign partners, be it on remote monitoring, be it on, let's say, inverter manufacturers and equipment manufacturers. So they've become kind of like a synonym of expensive but good. And so this is how I think they made a name for themselves.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to close our session. It's really a very interesting discussion. So one could really go on for hours, actually. So I would really like to thank the panelists for your very valuable contributions for the good discussion. And now I would like to hand over to Mrs. Dorothea Otremba. She's Senior Advisor at GIZ, and she will deliver the closing remarks. Thank you very much, and over to you, Dorothea.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gabriele Pammersberger, and thank you for your moderation. My name is Dorothea Otremba, working at GIZ, Green People's Energy for Africa, which Razvan Sadru introduced already. So good afternoon, good morning, or evening to everyone, depends where you are. The time went by so fast, and the 8th event of the webinar series coming to an end already. I wish we could have the whole day to discuss this interesting topic. Today, we witnessed an inspiring keynote by a speech by Mrs. Bärbel Höhn, who pointed out the importance of access to finance and highlighted various aspects. And we got very interesting insights to these topics from our excellent panelists, Mr. Daniel Kidwat, Mr. Razvan Sandru, Mrs. Garcia Munganga, and Mr. Mitil Roin. Many thanks to the panelists for sharing your experience and for the insights you have given us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very relevant to continue this discussion of financing the clean energy transition in Africa and to focus on sustainable approaches for implementation for the respective circumstances. Thousands of people are affected by this. So the aim of our event series is to cover the broadest possibility range of topics related to off-grid energy access with decentralized renewable energy solution. Today it was financing. For this, it is important to illuminate many facets, and an interdisciplinary approach is needed. So thank you very much also to the audience for joining us today and for your questions and suggestions. And the large number of participants shows how important this topic is. So a quick note before I finished: if you unfortunately missed the webinar of this series, don't worry, the summary, the PowerPoints, and the recording is also published on our website. Please feel free to get in touch with us from Green People's Energy to learn about our activities or to share your experience and ideas. Mostly welcome. And also to get in touch with the Alliance of Rural Electrification regarding the work and how they can assist you with very broad range of services. Now I come to the end. Thank you again for your participation today. Have a nice rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you at our next events. You will find the announcement on our websites and through our networks. So bye-bye and goodbye to everyone, and thanks again to the panelists. Thank you very much. This was very inspiring.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.